Hello, all. Garland here. It's Sunday afternoon, and we're kind of all hanging out. And I'm going to talk about the economics of the U.S. empire. We are clearly and obviously heading into a very significant economic downturn. We're going to have all kinds of various interests explaining to us the reasons for the economic downturn. I'm going to chat about the history a little bit of how we got here, where we are, and where we're going, and the reasons that I think we're facing an economic downturn. Let's talk. Good afternoon, Garland Nixon here. Follow me on Twitter at Garland Nixon and garlandin at gmail.com. I see Andres says, just watched Ukraine on fire yesterday. That is a must. And here's how you know Ukraine on fire is important, because YouTube took it down. They wouldn't take it down if it wasn't important that you watch it. So I'm looking at going to other platforms for obvious reasons, and I suggest everyone else start looking at some of the other video platforms. All right. What am I here to talk about today? The obvious economic downturn that we are in the throes of and how we got there. Let's start with this. The explanations coming from the usual suspects. There are numerous interests that have a valid reason to come up with an invalid explanation for the economic issues that we are in the throes of facing. Number one, the interests that have been benefiting from the economic model that we have been exercising since 1980, right? So if you're living well off of the way things are, you don't want to say this is systemic, right? You don't want to say these things have been coming for quite a while because of the economic model that we are exercising. What you want to say is, it's either Joe Biden's fault, right? I listen to conservatives and everything is self-serving. And that is, to me, I'm going to, before I really get into it, let me tell you a way that I recognize something is self-serving. If someone wants to do something, right, and every time the dynamics around them change, they say, yes, that explains why we need to do what I already wanted to do. For instance, right now, there are a lot of conservatives that have wanted to do more drilling. That's what they've been. Remember this: drill, baby, drill, drill, baby, drill. So everything that happens means we need to do more drilling. So we need to do more domestic hydrocarbon development. To me, that's a tell. If I say we want to do more domestic hydrocarbon development, and someone says, well, there's too much gas. Well, that means we need to do more domestic hydrocarbon development. Well, there's not enough. Well, that also means we need to do that. You see my point? My point is that the tell, when you listen to the various mainstream interests, is all of them will simply argue that what I already wanted you to believe is proven even more definitively by what's going on now. And no matter what happens, they're always going to say that. To me, that's a tell. You're not genuine if you say Garland's a jerk. Well, Garland was nice to me. That proves he was a jerk. Well, Garland was mean to me. That proves he's a jerk. That whatever Garland does proves he's a jerk, because your fundamental foundational argument is Garland's a jerk, and everything else then is just a convenient argument of convenience. So that's what we're seeing in the mainstream, quote, liberal and conservative theater, right? Turn on Fox News. Well, there you go. Joe's screwing up. And that proves that we need to do what we've been arguing we should do all along, whatever policies we are. So I disregard those who say we need to do more of what I've been arguing we should do. It's kind of like the idea that we need to cut taxes. Okay, well, the economy's made a downturn. We need to cut taxes. Oh, the economy's doing better. Well, we need to cut taxes. You know the game, right? No matter what it is, conservative, liberal, progressive, those who say that all changes in dynamics and economic dynamics proves that my model should be instituted, you got to question that. Okay, so let's move forward. So now, forget all of that. Why is it that these various interests are just continuing to argue for the same policies that they've been pushing for all eternity? Because most of the time, what you'll see is this: they're wealthy people, they're well-to-do people. They have a stake in maintaining this system. Now, if you're working class and you look at the numbers since the 1970s, things have been going in the wrong direction for you. All the economic indicators say the wealthy make more and you make less, no matter what. The wealthy, their income is rising, yours has remained flat or decreased. They've gotten tax cuts, you've gotten tax increases. So when we look at it from the perspective of the working class, the working poor, and the poor, their life has been going to hell, and the wealthy has been going to heaven. Why don't we use that metaphor, right? But where are we and how do we get here? So let's do this. Where are we? Well, we're in an economic downturn that, if you look at what was going on before COVID, the economic indicators before COVID said there were some serious problems. The market if you look at COVID as starting for the U.S. in like February, March, in September, October, the repo market, the loans, we won't even get into that, how the banks and different corporations borrow money in the market, inside the market, but they were indicating that the situation was going bad. And COVID started. And what I thought was interesting about COVID was this: when it first started and there were the shutdowns, there was something called the CARES Act in the United States. And they gave like $5 to $7 trillion to these corporations, the richest people on earth. And I'm like, wait a minute, we've got a biological disaster, and their answer is to give trillions of dollars to people that don't need it, to dump more money in the market, to act like it's 2008. What's that about? There have been arguments that the economy was crashing. They knew it was crashing. They pumped a ton of money into it to reinvigorate it once again. The market was falling apart, and that the lockdowns really, let me put it like this: that if they just pumped that money into the economy, that it would be too much. It would overheat the economy, and things would blow out, right? And inflation would go crazy. So the lockdowns effectively, and I'm not saying anybody did something for a different reason or not, but what effectively happened is the CARES Act comes out, you give $5 to $7 trillion into the market, into the corporations to save a flailing market, and then you lock people down, and that shuts the economy down. That puts it on hold so that the inflation doesn't blow up. Now, I don't know if that's true. I've heard that argued, but that's certainly it's not an incredible argument. It is definitely credible and plausible for someone to make that economic argument. Pump all this money in, but you got to do a reset. You got to shut the economy down so it doesn't leach. All this money doesn't go blasting right out into the economy, and everything runs into super high inflation. Okay. So they get 2 years of kind of a respite, where for those 2 years, all the economic problems are blamed on COVID, right? Well, this is the COVID economy. You've heard that, and all the problems that we've had as a result of COVID. And there are those of us that argued, it was their reaction to COVID that caused more problems than COVID itself. There was deaths and it was all that kind of things, but I'm not speaking of more problems as far as deaths. We don't know that for sure yet. We don't know what's going to happen. There are a lot of factors that haven't been taken into account when it comes to COVID, such as people who were locked down and didn't get checked for cancer and didn't get treatments for some things and didn't find out in early that they had cancer. And then they ended up, by the time they found out, it was too late, things of that nature, right? So whether or not there were more or less deaths as a result of the responses to COVID, time will tell. I don't know. I'm not saying there was or wasn't. Time will tell. But economically, it kind of gave them 2 years to kill. It was kind of odd to me. I don't know what it means, but I'm just going to say it's kind of odd. Don't you think it's kind of odd that it was like within days? Okay, COVID's done. Now there's the war, and now the disaster is everything's blamed on the war in Ukraine, right? That's the economic problems. Joe Biden's running around saying gas is going up because of the war in Ukraine. Everything, and again, let's ask the same question: was it the war in Ukraine that caused gas to go up and the markets to go crazy and things of that nature worldwide? Or was it the response of the leaders to the war in Ukraine? It seems more likely than not that it was the latter, that it was the sanctions, massive sanctions just horrified the market. Massive sanctions around people were like, wait a minute, this is one of the three great world powers. And of the three great powers, this is the one that, along with the United States, that puts out the most natural resources. Number one in wheat. And when you add Ukraine to that, right? Number one in wheat. And then Ukraine, but I'll put it like this: between Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, that's 50% of the agricultural products for the EU. That spells disaster, doesn't it? And particularly spells disaster for developing nations, Africa, South America, et cetera, where they get wheat, things like that. Then you look at the industrial products, the metals, the different things that are used to keep industry going, to keep the factories going, things of that nature. You know, this gigantic country of Russia, what is it, like an eighth of the world's surface or something like that, or land surface? This country puts out a lot of things that industry needs worldwide to keep going, and all of a sudden they cut that off. Well, they're not stupid. Why'd they cut that off? They knew the damage it's going to do. You got to ask yourself, when we ask ourselves questions like this, when we talk about what's going to happen, my gosh, the economy is going to get destroyed and this is going to happen and there's going to be hunger and all, you have to say, if we can figure it out, they're not stupid. They may be incompetent, they may be evil, but they're not stupid. If you and I can figure it out, that means they can figure it out. So it's hard to comprehend. It's hard for me to argue that the people who are making these economic moves, these catastrophic economic moves, are not aware of what they're doing, and that none of this is intentional. You've got a country that's $30 trillion in debt, and that's an unpayable debt. And you've got a market that's loaded with, like, literally hundreds of trillions of dollars in derivatives and things like that, things that are just magical economic tools that are created on Wall Street in London and Berlin that aren't really real, and they're out there just waiting to blow the market to pieces. So you've got a Western market that's built on the magic of creation and imagination. It's not even real stuff. It's not tangible items anymore, right? So that inevitably has to fall apart. And I would think one way to look at it is, does it fall apart and you say this was a bad system, or do you have some kind of a controlled demolition where you can maybe come up with some new kind of system? I don't know. I don't know all of that, but I do know those are questions, valid questions to be asked when you consider that the people who are making these catastrophic economic moves, as far as the sanctions, are wise enough to be able to understand the results of their actions. They're not stupid enough. Let's not pretend that they're stupid enough so stupid that they don't understand the results of their actions. Now, I would argue that maybe we could say their incompetence would be to a level where maybe they didn't anticipate the speed of the results. Immediately after all of these sanctions started, the Biden team started running to Venezuela and running to Iran and saying, can you get gas on the market? But they're not fuel oil on the market, but they're not willing to make any compromise to make it happen. So I don't see it really happening. They'd have to compromise. They'd have to give something up to Venezuela or Iran, and they would rather every one of us starve to death than they compromise on their values. And their value is let's be honest, what's their values? World domination. Full spectrum domination over the world. That's their only value. So they'd rather every one of us starve to death and wallow in poverty than they have to abandon the idea of world domination. That's tantamount to death to these people. Now, death for us is okay, but not death for them. So, okay, let's go here. How did we get here? In 1980, Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan started this downward trajectory. And it kind of went like this. It wasn't reasonable. What did we have before that? We had a number of things. You know, we had jobs, we had unions. And why, to me, why do I think unions were important? Okay, you have capital, you have the people in power who have very concentrated wealth and concentrated power. The people who are working don't have any power. What unions did was it brought them together. It gave them a bargaining chip. It gave them some power, so they could force the people in power to give them a little more than a crumb, to give them a piece of the action. So they were getting a piece of the action. Things are going well. We had the post World War II and the post crash of 29. We had some banking regulations. We had a number of regulations that were put in by FDR and the team to kind of keep, again, to temper the concentration of power on Wall Street and in the powerful halls of industry, right? So those things were kind of tempering the power of these people and their ability to run amok. Let me give you an example. 1981, there was a deregulation, the savings and loan deregulation. And there were, believe it or not, there was three senators. One of them was Chuck Schumer. Another one was, his last name was Saint Germain. And I don't remember the other, but there was three of them, two Democrats and a Republican, who put through this bill to deregulate savings and loans, allow savings and loans to do whatever they wanted, lend any kind of way they want, take the riskiest loans in the world. 81. 7 years later, in 1987, you had the savings and loan crisis, and they crashed. And the U.S. government bailed out the savings and loan for $550 billion. Well, in 1987, money towards now, that's trillions, right? So there was an indicator at that point of what deregulating Wall Street would do. It was clear. And when we looked at what they did in the intermediary years between 1981 and 87, there was madness. They gave horrible loans out to anyone. They squandered money and lived like, Roman emperors. It was insanity. And of course, it fell apart and the people bailed them out. So in comes Bill Clinton. Again, the liberals class of the Clintons, etc., had decided that they were going to go along with this whole, it's neoliberalism is what we call it now, but with this new economic model that the Reagan and Thatchers had introduced. Tony Blair was down with it too. At any rate, so let's move forward. So Bill Clinton works along with the Republicans, and they start doing NAFTA, the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement, wherein you have that was like the kind of the birth of globalism. You've got these trade agreements that cross borders that allow corporations to, one of the things about these trade agreements has been really bad. It allows a corporation, if we're doing business in our various countries, they set up like a court. Rather than me being able to sue Corporation X in the US for doing things to us, there's a court now that I have to go to. And I go to this international court, and then I just file my complaints, and then the court will hear my complaints against Company X for, pouring something horrible in our creek. But the corporations put the court together and hire the people that make the decisions, so it always finds in their behalf. So it was a way, this was one of the genius, the brilliant parts of neoliberalism for the corporations is it removed the constraints of democracy. Globalism gets around democracy. People in a particular a country can exercise their rights to democracy and exercise their rights to court, and they can take countries to court, et cetera. And companies to court, and companies can do that with each other. What these moves did was it removed the constraints of democracy. So now these corporations really could just float around the world and do everything they want, and they moved their money around, and they just became international conglomerates, but not an American corporation or a British corporation or a French corporation. They were just a corporation that used the world to park their money however they wanted to. And then they would find like some small island like Cyprus or the Isle of Man or Guernsey or whatever, Jersey, I think it's called. And now they would say, okay, this is where my company operates out of, and all my profit goes to this company. I'm an American company, completely grounded in America, but I'm going to put my headquarters on this little island out in the middle of nowhere, and I'm going to say that all the profits go there. Oh, and by the way, I own the government there, so I don't have to pay profits. So these gains started to come about. Gains that were sucking the money out of the US and the EU and into the hands of these billionaires and these international oligarchs. And ultimately what happened was this. These oligarchs had so much money, they started to buy out the government. They started to own the government. They started to be able to influence the legislation they wanted, right? They started to be able to influence who went on the courts. It's funny that a lot of conservatives, when they saw, some of the Roberts and some of these other people go to the courts, they thought, great, we've got a conservative guy. And then they were shocked when he didn't, when these conservatives didn't rule the way they thought they would on particularly on social issues. And I kind of laughed. I'm like, you don't understand. They're not there for social issues. They're there because they're corporate puppets, the same as the rest of them. They're there to ensure, in the end, that all decisions are made, continue to move all power to corporations. And it's not an accident that as these things were put in place, our economy started to shift in a way that all of the money would go up to the corporations. So then we have the 2008 crash. What's interesting is after the 2008 crash, we were told, and this is another discussion, we were told that, well, the economy's coming back and we're having a recovery. And then we were told, well, 97% of the money in the recovery went to the top 1%. Well, all of those things are kind of yes and kind of no. Here's what I mean. Did we have a recovery? I would argue we didn't have a recovery. I would argue that the money went to the top 1%, but it had nothing to do with the recovery. Here's what I mean. The way that gross domestic products and things like that are calculated, they're all based on Wall Street calculations, right? So what happens? Example, 2008. All these people lose their houses. Millions and millions, 10 million, I don't know how many millions of people lose their houses. Wall Street, banks, etc., then buy these houses up, buy this property up, buy these companies up for pennies on the dollar. They turn it over and sell it, and they make a profit. Well, they've made a profit. That counts as part of the gross domestic product. So we say the gross domestic product went up because these companies made a profit. But what was it really? They were vultures picking the bones of a dead economy. So when you say there was a recovery, in numbers, there was a recovery because Wall Street was able to take advantage of a dead economy and turn it over into money. And then when you look at who won from the recovery, you'd say there was a recovery and 97% of it went to the top 1%. When you put it all together, it works like this. There wasn't really a recovery. It's just numbers. According to gross domestic product, the top 1% bought everything in a fire sale for pennies on the dollar, turned it over and made a profit. That profit was counted as the gross domestic product. So we said there was a recovery, but there was no recovery. It's just that the top 1% turned things over and got richer. Okay. So that's a long way of getting here. So now here we are. Oh, let me, and I got to add, you've got to add 9/11. Because when people talk about the stagflation of the 1970s and the economic problems of the 1970s, they forget Vietnam. The spending of Vietnam is one of the things that caused the issues, the economic issues of the 1970s. Now, when you get into the 9/11, what happened? 2003, George Bush starts a war, the second one in 2 years. And after starting a war, he goes out and cuts taxes. Whoop, swipes the credit card, borrows money, like 80% of it went to the top 1%, top 10%. Right? So what do? We now go into this big borrowing spree. That's how we got to this $30 trillion unpayable debt. So money is being, but how could they get away with that? How could they get away? Because people said, well, if you drive up the debt, it'll cause inflation. If you keep printing money, it'll cause inflation, and then everything will fall. But they kept printing money and it didn't cause inflation. Why? Why didn't it cause inflation? Well, if you have a closed system, if you have a country, and in that country you have a denomination, the lira, per se, right? That's your denomination. If you print more lira in that country, there's more lira. The more you print, the less value for the ones that are already out. And next thing you know, everybody's got a bushel basket full of lira, but they can't buy anything with it because you've devalued the lira internally, right? The US dollar had an escape hatch. It was and is, for how long is another discussion, well, no, that'll be part of this. It will be the it was, excuse me, the international currency. The dollar was used worldwide for trading. Therefore, As they printed more money and borrowed more money, the money they were printing could dissipate out into the world. So rather than a closed system where you print more money, you devalue your money, and you have massive inflation, they print more money. The money didn't get devalued because it had escape hatch. It could go out into the world. The petrodollar, people were buying oil and gas and all kinds of things. Other countries were living with the dollar. The dollar was king. So when you look at it, we had a way of getting away with it, but time was going to catch up with that sooner or later. But other things happened. The United States, there used to be a gold-backed dollar. That's a lot to talk about, but let's just put it like this. The US and the whole Western economic system works off of trust. People buy bonds because they trust that your economy is strong, and they put money in your accounts, Western accounts, because they trust that if they give you that money, when they come calling, you'll give it back. One of the things that's happened recently is the US and the collective West has said, nah, we won't always do that. If we don't like you, if we have a political gripe against you or whatever, even your own sovereign debt with these sanctions, what is it? We're taking everything of Russia's, right? So now if you're around the world, you're like, yikes. We don't have the trust for the Western banking system. And the Western banking system, it's not gold-backed money, it's backed on trust. So the problem is they've lost this trust, and therefore I think we're going to see major flight as best people can from Western banking systems and Western bonds and things of that nature. And that's going to cost us. We've taken action with these sanctions that are going to limit and greatly increase the price, either limit the availability of and or increase the price of lots of food items that, wheat, etc., fertilizer, which creates your food, energy, any number of things. The price is going to go up. It's going to become more scarce because you've taken a lot of it off the market with Russia. And so all of these things, the prices are going to increase. At the same time, we have dramatically decreased the trust in the dollar and in the Western banking systems. So you're going to get a certain amount of capital flight. So here's where I'm going with this. We had a system of neoliberalism, and the neoliberalism is not like, the Democrats. It's the Republicans, the Democrats, all of this whole system was based on neoliberalism, and the wealthy was making a killing off of it, doing well, and they all supported it, and they're all still going to say it's not a systemic problem. It's Joe Biden. No, this is Putin's prices increase. No, this is whatever. This is the result of neoliberalism over the long term. And okay, so the chronic problem is our neoliberal policies that say we deregulate everything, we concentrate power in the hands of a few, we austerity for the people. Anything that goes for the people, any kind of social safety net system, you get rid of that, right? Those are some of the foundations of neoliberalism. So those are the things that we get. The Republicans, the austerity part of neoliberalism, that's their side of the street that they work. Austerity, we take everything from the poor, the working class, healthcare, any kinds of tax credits for any kind of anything that goes to the working class and the poor. Austerity is their side, and they're pro-war. And the Democrats certainly go with deregulation also. And, the Republicans claim they do all the stuff that they don't do. But here's what happens. The Republicans will be in, and they'll put in tax cuts for the rich, deregulation, et cetera. And the Democrats will say, we're going to get rid of that, all of that stuff. And they'll come in and they won't get rid of it. And oftentimes what they'll do is they'll sign it into permanency, right? So they kind of play this push me, pull you game, and they pretend to work opposite sides of the street, but they just have different roles in the neoliberal game, in instituting the neoliberal policies. They have different roles, but they both do it. Okay. So now they've decided that, and I think there are a number of things, there are a number of things. Certainly one of them is that the neoliberal system was bound to crash anyway, and it was in the process of crashing, and that it was hurting the average person so bad that the economic system that we have no longer provided the basics that the people in society need. People need healthcare, they need a job, they need education, they need certain basic things, fundamental things, and security and stuff like that. And they want, of course, a certain amount of freedom and rights and things like that. And we're in a society that was no longer providing that foundation of things, right? The foundation of their, look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. As look at that, and that'll help you out to understand some of the basics that human beings need to survive. Society no longer provides that. But if you're wealthy, man, you're getting it all. Things are looking good. So the wealthy have a stake, whether it's the right or the left so-called side of the neoliberals, whether it's the fake conservatives or the fake liberal side of neoliberalism, they have a stake in protecting the system. Well, my friends, let's talk about reality. And where are we going? I think that we are in the process of entering a level of desperation, poverty, maybe hunger, things like that, that the people of our generation have not experienced and are not prepared to experience. And Joe Biden's team, you can argue that Biden did it, but he was the last cog. I'll put it like this. When I look at the Ukraine crisis, right? I can go back to 2008 when the Russians said to NATO, if you bring Ukraine into NATO, that's a red line, and say that's when it was baked in the cake. I can go to 2014 and say when the U.S. overthrew the government of Ukraine and installed a pro-U.S. government and started pumping Ukraine full of Western weapons and turning it into a de facto member of NATO, that's when the hostilities started. I can go back to whatever, February 28th, and say when the tanks rolled across the border from Russia, from Crimea and Belarus, that's when the hostility started. I could start it at any given time that I want to. Bottom line is, because there's so many factors involved here, but the bottom line is now we are where we are and what's happening going forward. So regardless of whether I start this, so then depending on where I started, I can blame NATO, I can blame Putin, I can blame, I can blame NATO because I can say in 2008, they were told what would happen. I can blame Victoria Nuland and her crew, and I can say 2014, that's when it started, because they should have never overthrown a government on the border of Russia, of another great power. They should have saw it coming. That I can start it there. And a lot of people do feel that that's a legitimate starting point. I can start it in February, a week and a half before the actual hostility started, and say when Vladimir Zelensky said we want to get nuclear weapons, that the Russians then said that's a red line, we're going to war, right? And I can argue Vladimir Zelensky doesn't say go to the bathroom without permission from the U.S. State Department, so that he's just a spokesperson for the West, and somebody told him to say that and he said it. I can start anywhere, but depending where how I want to see it, or then I can say, well, Putin made the decision to invade, so it's all his fault if he hadn't invaded. That's a big discussion, and I think there are valid arguments. Certainly for 2014, I think, to me, maybe the strongest argument, but 2008 is a strong argument. So whatever the case may be, doesn't matter where you sit, depends on where you stand. So depending on who you see as the bad guy will depend on what you see as the reason for this particular military crisis. Okay. But you've got a tinderbox and somebody threw a match. I think the Biden administration, the tinderbox. So if we can talk about this the military and politically, but if we talk about this economically only, you've got a tinderbox that there may already be an underlying fire, and Biden and company throw a match on the fire, and that is these sanctions. And do they have any idea what they're doing? Their level of incompetence is so high. I don't know. I would think it's hard for me to argue that they don't. But it's almost like when this happened, these people all hated Russians so bad. It's almost like an ethnic racial hatred, to be honest. It's getting fairly obvious. This is not just about politics. This is not just about the military, that there are people involved here who just hate Russians with a passion of, racial hatred. It's kind of scary, really, to me. I mean, hey, there's a Russian person who sings, we got to fire that person. There's a Russian person who directs an opera, we've got to fire. It's like, oh, the evil Russian, You have Russian blood in you. You are of Russian ethnicity. So now you have to be punished because you are just of Russian ethnicity. That's kind of scary if you really think about it. It's horrifying to me. But at any rate, so Biden throws a match on this fire. And it seems to me that some of it was like teenagers at a party where one says, I dare you to do this, and they do it. And the other says, oh, yeah, well, I'll go further. And the teenagers keep going further and further and further until they're playing with a gun and they're playing Russian roulette. And then somebody gets shot in the head and they all run off. Oh, my God, what have we done? How are we going to deal with this? And that's kind of what it looks like to me, that the EU and the US and their ally, the US and its vassals instead of the EU, the US and its vassals started playing chicken with sanctions. And at some point, they shot our economy in the head playing Russian roulette. And now it's going to be totally wiped. They're totally wiping out the world economy. You know, the sad thing is, here's really what's really sad. The people of the developing nations are going to suffer first because it's going to be hardest for them to get food, and they don't have as much money. It's going to be harder for them to be able to afford to buy the things that are extremely highly priced, on the international market. But the social disruption in the US and EU are going to be very dangerous because the people in these countries are not accustomed to the level of poverty and desperation that they're going to face. They're not ready for bean soup if you're lucky for dinner. So we are going to see disruption, and we've got treacherous leaders who unfortunately are going to try to, I mean, look, do you think Joe Biden's going to say, oops, sorry about that, guys, I blasted the economy to pieces? He's already started. Blame Putin. It's all Putin's fault. It's going to be, let's blame somebody on the outside, and then we have to go to war with these people out here why they've destroyed our lifestyle. So it's a very dangerous time when you have an empire that's clearly crashing. Clearly, I mean, this is, if you ever see the picture of a plane that's in flames and it's going down, that's the U.S. empire. And I mean, we're now in full descent, in absolute full descent, and it's going to get much worse. And the question is, how will the people deal with it? Who will turn on who? Will they be able to redirect the sheep? Will they be able to give us some new colored ribbons, right? And if you watch me, I always talk about the ribbons. 2003 or whatever it was, 1991, when the U.S. would attack Iraq, and they'd say, put a yellow ribbon around your mailbox or a tree in your yard. You'd see people with yellow ribbon stickers for the troops, for when the troops come home. I don't know what that really meant, but it was a yellow ribbon for the suckers and the sheep to drag us into supporting another war that was not in our best interest. And now it's a blue and yellow ribbon for Ukraine. Now the suckers get blue and yellow ribbon. So I guess they'll have different colored ribbons to hand out to the sheep. But we're going to have to eat the damn ribbons and make soup out of them, from the looks of things. So that's where we are, I guess. We are in an economic decline, or even an economic descent. Decline ain't getting it. It kind of, a decline kind of implies a slow decline. It implies a slow descent. This is a rapid descent. And to say, I'll put it like this: within 2 months, between say March, when Joe Biden did the old, we're going to, when they started the whole sanctions program, you watch where we are by June 1st. There's another possibility that I have to throw out there. Not a good one, but it's a possibility. Not likely, but it's a possibility. That a month or two out, when they see the smoke coming out of all four engines and the ground approaching, that they say, let's go back and talk to Russia. Hey, Russia, hope we weren't out of line with that whole "you're evil" guys. Do you think we could just work this thing back out and maybe start buying stuff from you at a regular price again? Well, I don't think Russia's going to take a bite of that pie. I do think there's a possibility that the West will come back to Russia and try to work out a deal. I think Russia is turning east. I think they've made their point. The Russians have said, we will never ever put ourselves in a position where we got to rely on you unreliable bastards again. I'm paraphrasing. So we should have done this instead of saying, oh my God, we're hurt. They're saying what you have demonstrated to us is that we should have done this a long time ago, that we should have slowly been decoupling from you so that when it got to this point, we could just say, go to hell, we're gone. That's their position. And I think that as the West comes back to them, inevitably, I think comes back to them, they're going to be in a position where they're going to have tremendous leverage. I mean, let's be honest. At some point, the Russians are going to have tremendous leverage. They've made it through here so far. They're making it. They're still surviving. They still got food on their shelves. Their economy hasn't completely crashed. Let's say the Russians have 20% inflation. It's not unreasonable to say that. Hell, we're going to have 10 to 15. So realistically, we ain't going to be all that much. They ain't going to be all that much worse than us. But remember, the Russians can grow their own food and they have their own energy. They can they can survive. You can grow your own food. You can make your own energy. You can survive. Yeah, you can't do that. They're toast. And I think the Russians are going to be like, look, sorry, nice talking to you. We're selling our stuff to Pakistan, to India, to China, to Asia, to Africa, to South America. We've got markets. We're selling our stuff to the markets. If we have anything left over, EU and US, we'll sell it to you at exorbitant prices and take you to the cleaners. No guarantee. We'll get back to you later. Peace. Have a nice day. We're out. I think that's where the Russians are going to end up being. But whatever the case may be, nothing's going to save us at this point. The decisions have been made. We've jumped. And we're in the air and we're going to hit. And I think that all of us should be prepared for that. But it's not like, if you think about it, it ain't like you're going to do this and somehow you're going to be so much worse off than your neighbor. Nah, we're all in the same boat, my friends. The Titanic. And actually, before I leave, I think, and I've seen this before, and I guess it's because it's so blatantly obvious that I've said it also, been saying it for a while. This is more like a Moby Dick moment where, Captain Ahab is, has got to have, he's obsessed with this great white whale that he's got to get. He goes after the whale. Eventually, he finally catches up with the whale and his ship goes down and, everybody gets it, right? The whale, he catches the whale and when he gets the whale, it cost him everything, right? Biden and the, what I call the, Cold War Democrats have hated Russia for eons, right? And so they've been, and of course, Putin, oh my God, there's nothing more evil on this earth than Putin to these people. Say they've been chasing their great white whale of Russia and Putin, and they caught him. And we're the crew on the ship. And so in their madness to catch Putin, they didn't notice that the ship was leaking, that, water was coming in, that a storm was coming in. All these things are coming around them. And they're so focused on this great white whale. They've got to get the whale that they forgot to look out for their own safety, that they forgot to say, maybe we should abandon our illogical quest for the questing beast, as it's called in what was that book? The Sorcerer and the Stone, the what is it? The King Arthur's whole thing, yeah, right? The questing beast. That we're after this questing beast, right? So ultimately, they caught the whale. Garland Nixon, at Garland Nixon on Twitter, Garland.Nixon on Instagram, just plain old Garland Nixon on Facebook. And I don't know if I said it, garlandn@gmail.com. Let's look at a couple of things that people have to say. How about this? The fight is imminent. How about this? The U.S. is lost in its heart of darkness. I agree with that. It is a heart of darkness. When you get to a point where you're saying, yes, there are Russians and they just happen to be Russian, that's all, and we're going to fire them. We're going to throw them out of our country. We're going to treat them harshly just because their ethnicity is Russian. They have not violated any law. Or we say they're friends of Putin. Well, you know what? If I have a friend and my friend commits a crime or is accused of committing a crime, as in this instance, right? You could argue whether or not Putin's done something right, wrong, or whatever, however you want to look at it. As I said, it depends if you want to go back to 2008 or 2014 or 2022, whatever the case may be. But You say, look, Garland, somebody you know has done something and I'm unhappy about it. Therefore, I'm taking all of your money. I'm confiscating your bank account and I'm going to throw you in jail. I'm going to fire you from your job. Would that be legal in the United States? Should it be legal in the United States? That we should be that's really collective punishment? So now the US and the EU are saying that, well, you're Russian, you can't own a football team. You're Russian, you can't direct an orchestra. You're Russian, you can't sing in an opera. That's problematic. That is, I mean, in my opinion, that's neo-Nazi stuff. That's the Russians are the new Jews. Russians are the new unvaccinated. We were going that way. You're unvaccinated. You can't go into certain businesses and do certain things. And in some instances, you lose your job, right? So now the unvaccinated, quote, apparently COVID doesn't exist anymore. That's over. That's a whole nother story. And just like that, COVID, never mind. Let's move forward. And we went from it's going to be a long, cold, deadly winter for the unvaccinated. Remember all of that stuff? And they're killing they're deadly. They're like terrorists. And Pierre Trudeau saying about the unvaccinated, they're sexist and racist and misogynist. The question is, should we tolerate them? So we've went from should we tolerate the unvaccinated to should we tolerate Russians? Should we tolerate those who like Russians or work for Russia? Russian media, should we tolerate it? It's almost like we've got to have a boogeyman. We've got to have some kind of an evil. And, I said I was out, but I'm still going on. But who gives a damn? I'm still talking. I'm amongst friends, right? So it becomes this like racial ethnic hatred for Russians, and it's spread around. And our government, see, what's bad about it, a government's supposed to do the opposite. When the people have like some social issue of racism against this particular group, the government's supposed to say, sorry, we don't allow that. And everybody has to be treated the same regardless of race or religion or ethnicity, right? That's what the government's supposed to say. You can't do that. You can't tell somebody, well, you're Russian, I don't serve your kind here. The government's supposed to say that's illegal in our country. We don't allow that. That ain't where we're trying to go. Our government is literally pushing those kinds of things. And they're bragging. We went after the money of an oligarch, and he's Russian, and why? Doesn't everybody deserve a trial, a fair trial? Doesn't everyone? Can you just let me ask you this? Can the government just come to Garland tomorrow and arbitrarily say, Garland, you work for so and so, you like so and so, you're friends with so and so, therefore we're confiscating your bank account. Therefore, you can't work anymore. You can't direct an orchestra or sing, right? That is really sounds like Nazi Germany. Or let's be honest, there were laws like that in Ukraine. If you speak Russian, you would actually get a ticket. Speaking Russian in Ukraine, you get a ticket, and you would get fined for speaking Russian, even if that was your native tongue in Ukraine. And so we look at where we are now and where we're going, and our government is pushing racial and ethnic hatred towards a particular group, and there are a bunch of people buying into it. Well, I think it's dangerous. I really don't think that we should be in that area economically and socially, but that's where we are. And we should be prepared, and we should be ready to deal with it, do the best we can, and understand it so that maybe we can be at the heart of having a discussion of how we make a change. Instead of just voting for Democrats or Republicans anymore, maybe we realize, because I said to somebody recently, well, the Democrats are crap. Yeah, they're crap. And I said, and the Republicans are the same thing. Well, only the rhinos. So what he's saying is, I'm still part of this blue-red fakery. And I'm going to still have to believe that one of the parties is good, and there's just a rogue element in this particular one of the parties that's wrong. And if only we could get rid of that rogue element, we'd be fine. And there are people the same way the Democrats. Well, if only we could get rid of the corporate Democrats. That is the entire Democrats. Well, if only we could get rid of the rhinos. All the rhinos do is they let you know that's who this party is. If the party didn't want the rhinos, they throw them out. If those are the people who run the parties. That's the same people in both parties. They're not disagreeing on anything. So keep an eye out as things begin to economically deteriorate. Hopefully you'll be able to look out for yourself. You'll be able to look for options and think about what's going on and understand it, and maybe look, instead of just getting caught up in a blame game where you blame someone from this country or that country. You'll be able to say, we need to make some structural changes in our economic system, and we need to stop this basically regressive system that pumps all of the money towards the top 1% and allows them to buy our Congress. We need to put some maybe third party people in, maybe some independents in, that at least will have a chance, because they're not in these two bought out parties. I don't know. It's a thought. It's an option. We're going to learn from the pain we're about to get, but understand, I mean, Joe Biden is an abysmal president, but it isn't just Joe Biden. It is systematic. It isn't one particular person. It is the system. It's fundamentally flawed. Our economic model currently is fundamentally flawed. It is neoliberalism. It is money for the rich. It is money for wars. It is power, no democracy. It is the political power is all in the hands and concentrated in the hands of a few oligarchs, and all this crap they say about the Russian oligarchs, or this country's oligarchs, or that country's oligarchs. Well, Bill Gates and the Koch brothers and Bezos, they're not oligarchs. Doesn't make sense. They're giving you a false rhetoric to keep you stupid, and to keep you believing that the economic model that we have of neoliberalism just needs to be tweaked a little bit. Just if we can just tweak neoliberalism a little bit, it'll be fine. Yeah, well, good luck. Best of luck with that. Thank you very much. Again, at Garland Nixon on Twitter. Look, and here's something I'd like you to do. Please, if you are watching this on Twitter, go to my YouTube channel. And when you get to the YouTube channel, subscribe, like, and share on all of your platforms, so I can hopefully get more subscribers. I'm working now on getting on some of the other platforms, because you know good and well that if you now, and this is another bad sign, if you're talking about the economic system, if you're talking about the political system in any honest and critical way, that you are subject to be deplatformed. That's obvious. So, I'm going to be looking at other platforms, because at any given time, it wouldn't shock me. Anyone who's critiquing right, left, in the middle, independent, libertarian, you name it. If you are honestly critiquing the policies of the U.S. empire, you are subject to be deplatformed. So thank you very much, Garland Nixon. Like, share, subscribe. Peace. I'm out.